I begin by acknowledging that we're gathering here on unceded Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land and pay my respect on behalf of Gertrude to elders past, present and emerging. It's a great pleasure to have with us today on the occasion of the opening of their respective shows. Yona Lee visiting from Auckland, Aotearoa, and Lilian Steiner, a choreographer, dancer and a performer and artist based in Melbourne. So the format of, we're going to go straight into the opening of the exhibition come 4 o'clock, and we thought that this, given that Yona is visiting from Auckland, we wanted to kind of create this opportunity to hear directly from the artists, and Lilian as well is on the precipice of relocating to Europe to take up some professional opportunities just next month, actually. It'll be a relatively, we've had a chat over the last kind of couple of weeks, but we wanted to keep this kind of quite porous and not too structured, so we'll have an informal conversation for around 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to you if there's any questions that you'd like to ask any of the people present as well. So, how to start? Yona, it's your work is something that I've been in awe of for a number of years since I was first exposed to it in Sydney, and you've been really well supported, of course, through Art New Zealand, showing recently in the City Gallery and Dunedin Public Art Gallery, currently at the Physics Room, and also internationally at the Busan Biennale and the Lyon Biennale. So it's great to present your second project here in Melbourne after a showing of a project at West Base in 2016, I think it was. And maybe a way to kind of start to unravel this is maybe even for both of you to think about kind of the titles of your show. So Yona, your title is Wall, Floor and Ceiling, which is a really, in some ways kind of very prescriptive kind of acknowledgement of what an audience might encounter within the space.
I think just hit it up a little maybe. How's that?
You can share this
just
one.
yell.
I've got it. Hi everyone. Thank you for coming today, and thanks for having me here. It's really amazing to show alongside Lilian and the curatorial vision to have like a dance perspective alongside my work. And so my title is Wall, Floor and Ceiling, and as Mark mentioned, some of the larger installations, they often are quite site-specific, meaning the works are specifically made for specific sites, and often they are like one-off exhibitions. And so with this exhibition, Mark and I talked about developing more the discrete objects that I've been developing over the past few years, and one of the ways to respond to the space specifically but not physically constrained was to think about what a room is comprised of, and they are comprised of ceiling and walls and floor, and thinking that as a way to respond and formatting the work to occupy these elements of the architecture.
I'll quickly tap into that. I think we've sent you lots of images around the space, and I think that's a really interesting thing about talking about a kind of new set of works commissioned for this exhibition that would take this form within an architecture you haven't experienced before. Like, what is it for you as an artist, kind of creating things for an environment that you don't yet know?
It's usually really challenging, and I really try to site visit and spend some time. But sometimes practically sometimes can't be possible, and so I ask dimension every plans and try to build like a model of the space through computer programs and to help me understand. But always when I write in space, it's always surprised by different elements. I thought the space would be more rectangular, but with the opening up of the space, this entrance and to Lilian space, it's like a third of the space becomes a transitional space. So some of these elements are not quite, I couldn't really imagine through these documents, but because I've been thinking about the ceiling as a whole, wall as a whole, floor as a whole, so in a way some of the details of the space didn't quite matter in this project.
But by the same token, I guess over the past few days we've been talking about how, there's such a tension in your work that is really dependent upon the very specifics of the architecture. And I guess, talking about how you don't really know certain things, is that also kind of like a tension that you like to play with in your work? Like there is also a very known element. I got the impression that you were kind of wanting to control quite a bit before installing, but then there's this tension of the known and unknown that I feel like is really present in your sculptures.
And I think I sort of kind of approached it as like having a conversation with the space. And when I sort of like work on exhibitions and when I know that it's working really well is when space starts to talk back, or like the space starts to contribute to the ideas that I haven't really been able to think through. So I think, so I always sort of approach the space in exhibition in an open-minded way and sort of letting the space to speak.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good opportunity then to also segue over to Lilian. And we were talking a lot about, obviously your two practices are so different, but you each approach space, for you as a choreographer, space is essential, and for you as well, Yona. But for this show, it's kind of, I guess, a real departure from what you've done in the past, because this is the first exhibition that you've done of discrete objects without actual performance. How do you see this exhibition now as fitting into your kind of like broader dance practice?
Yes, it's probably a question that I don't really know how to answer exactly yet, but there's something about, like with dance, it's an ephemeral art form, and it, by its very nature, like the value of it is in the fact that it happens and it disappears in that very moment. So there's something for me that's exciting and horrifying about trying to solidify those moments into something that can be looked at as a static thing for as long as somebody wants to. So there's something about the fear of doing that that also makes it exciting for me, because then it's a question of, well, what do I want that experience to be? And we were talking yesterday, or you asked whether I see this as a dance project. And even though the main materials are the body and dancing, like that's what has created all of the things in the exhibition, I don't see it as a dance, even though I might think of a piece of writing more as a dance, potentially.
Yeah, I was just, I feel like I've just...
This one's for you, Lilian. In many ways, I think your project unfolds as a really kind of quite beautiful and elegant homage to the people that you've collaborated with over many years, and influences and people who you might not have worked with but you find influential. some ways then it offers a kind of, I guess, a snapshot of a dance community in a specific place. Do you want to, the sculptural, the 3D sculptural works on that sit atop the print of your body, do you want to just talk people through so they can understand a bit of your, I guess, your thinking around what that would be and how it's kind of manifested as a physical form?
Yeah, so just a bit about the process. I worked really closely with my collaborator and partner Patrick Hamilton, and we started developing this way of using motion capture and dance to create basically the motion capture suit which I wore would capture the movement. And for this particular project, the dancers that I invited to contribute would dance an improvisation as themselves in any way, kind of offering anything that came out of their body in that moment, just knowing that that is already very much their identity. But wearing the motion captured suit, I tried to embody that dance as best I could, knowing that my own body has its own idiosyncrasies and ways of moving, or even that moment of transference of what I see and then how my body immediately responds without me trying to comment. So in this way, it was kind of me trying to trace or like paint their individual movement identities via my own body as a tool. And so what you'll see is these 8 3D prints, which are essentially them through the lens of my body. And then I've kind of selected from the full take of the dance, I've selected a certain number of frames and a certain type timing of trailing to create sculptures that I think then also represents their personalities. So it's kind of, me taking them through my body, but then also aesthetically trying to capture what they are as a new kind of fossilised form.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We were also talking about the logic of the archive in relationship to dance yesterday, and how there's photography, there's video documentation traditionally, but you're really trying to kind of, I guess, well, you can answer this question. Would you say that you're thinking about ways to archive dance collaboratively? Or what do you see the function of these sculptures doing outside of representing the dancers in this space or in time?
Yeah, I guess I've kind of been interested in the idea of so if photography or video captures one dance in that moment, but with this project I sort of wanted to think about how to archive a whole body of work within a body, and in the transference between those people's whole life practices and my own. So each sculpture is created from a specific dance in a moment in time, but there's so many layers that are creating that particular dance, and my relationship to them is also creating that particular exchange. Does that make sense? So I guess, thinking about how to archive something that is ephemeral is a big part of what I'm thinking about lately, but also how to give myself and people who may or may not come to see dance performance another way to understand something about dance and the practice of sharing. And I think there's something about archiving dance, and you don't really need to understand what you're being, what's being shared with you in a kind of cognitive way. I feel like dance is really good at giving its audience something that doesn't need to be spoken. So, for me, I feel like these sculptures are a way to approach dance and physicality and shared embodied knowledge as its own material or its own language of dance outside of
pure documentation.
Yeah, pure documentation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Did you want to?
I guess, I mean, thinking about Lil, you approaching the idea of creating an exhibition from the perspective of a dancer and from the perspective of a choreographer, and about a really different approach to kind of how bodies might navigate through an architectural space. And Yona, you also came to visual arts from a different background as well, like being trained as a classical cellist, and a lot of the way that we've been thinking and talking about your work to one another is kind of ideas of the musical composition is something that kind of really informs how your objects kind of manifest within or activate a kind of an architectural space. You said some really beautiful things yesterday about kind of the arrangement of works and how it bears similarities in some ways to the way that you think or thought about music. Did you want to open up about some of that kind of idea around kind of the composition of an exhibition, of a project?
I think we talked about having 3 discrete objects and why 3, and thinking through the idea, I thought a lot about these objects like instruments or ingredients or and thinking more about when you think about a trio, there's all kinds of variation. But for example, if you had like a violin, a cello, and a piano for a trio, and each instrument had different pitch range, the tone, the texture, they're all different, and when they come together, they create such a beautiful balance of sound. And thinking about food, when you cook, I'm not a good cooker, but I heard that it's all about how much salt you put in, how much sugar or vinegar. Maybe it's to do with that, but I'm also thinking about like a chair, like you need at least 3 legs or a table. So thinking in that way of these objects and how they talk to each other, and also thinking about earlier we talked about the wall and the ceiling and the floor, and I see them like each the space got different pitch range, like often traditionally paintings are usually hung on like walls and sculpture on the floor. And for me to kind of format these objects differently to the compatibility to these different forms, and like that example, but like a Dyson hairdryer, and like you change like the heads, and they perform
Different
functions, and they do different things. And so thinking about that as well, and also like extending the pitch range of sculpture, and how they could be formatted differently and occupy in the space differently.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the word function, which we have been talking about over the past few days as well, because there is a kind of pull back and forth with the logic of function in your work. The best example of which is the sculpture that's suspended from the ceiling that has a number of kind of like tram handles on it, because obviously it's impossible for anybody to hold on to them. But there is also, you do also include functionality in your work, and you kind of play with the viewer, kind of teasing them, giving them something, taking something away. What is your rationale behind that?
I think I do play formally, thinking about objects that are functional for the viewer, and also dysfunctional by intentionally, say, hanging a bus handle or too high, or like upside down. And I think it's sort of like, I think by doing that, I think it's to do with maybe the play between familiarity and unfamiliarity. And because these objects so mundane and like we use them every day, and these objects sort of help us go through our days.
But they almost, they almost become invisible because of that, right? I think someone wrote a piece about that. Was it Tony Ross? Tony Ross called your works normcore, which I thought was a cop-out, but you really loved that label.
I love that word. I think that's really great. And
why is that?
Yeah, I think it's to do with like something for everyone, or like I think, and I intentionally choose these objects that don't carry like loaded meanings. I mean, like objects do carry a lot of meanings, but I wouldn't necessarily, for example, like choose a bus handle that has like a narrative, like it's from somewhere specific, or like and something that's so standard that opens up like when the audience or the viewer like comes and interact with these objects. It's so standard that people can bring their own understanding or memory, or like just their.
Yep.
It's interesting to think about these, and I've always been really attracted to these works that are kind of more of a discrete scale and kind of perform a lot more like sculptural objects. But you've become quite known for your kind of massive spatial interventions, and I think, just touching on what you were mentioning around the idea of your choices around choosing objects that don't have a real kind of loading for audiences experiencing the work, but I feel like that can't really apply within these situations where you've done these kind of enormous, almost labyrinthine installations, and some people may have seen one a number of years ago commissioned by Justin Payton at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, that really do take on kind of a whole and confront a whole architectural environment. And I feel like there's no way that people can't bring some sort of effect from that idea of, even if it's the same kind of materials, but sheer scale and kind of embeddedness within a new architecture. Like, obviously people are going to be bringing quite different things to that kind of sense of the, ominous, omnipresent structure. So there's no real question, but maybe that's just thinking about it as those two things do have very different impacts in terms of their, a kind of a suggestion of kind of neutrality.
There's definitely like the inversion of like activation of the relationship between the viewer, between the larger scale where you look into the work, and these discrete objects, you're in the center and you look out to these. Also, there's a different like inversion of like the relationship, and I sort of see these discretes like a DNA or like a larger installations, and when you really zoom in. And I think this exhibition is also about what you see in the space, but also it's about what it references and what's not there. And if you see like an exposed like pipe in a building setting, like we understand that it's part of larger network. So like for me, like these discrete objects, how they're attached to floor and the wall, the ceiling, there's I guess
interconnectedness
behind the architecture, and I see them, and this material, LT, the stainless steel tubing, has been really interesting to work with because in a way it can grow and continue to grow into scale of a building, like an architectural level, and then it can be reduced to like an object. So there's a wide spectrum in terms of this language, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you say that, and I'm recalling something that you said yesterday actually about Yona's work, because I'm obsessed with like collecting these kind of like binaries in your work, you know, like functional, non-functional, and another one that you've touched on here is this idea of like the infinite network and then the discrete object. And well, you said yes. What did you say yesterday about Yona's work? It's like the works are so small, but they kind of are so contained in themselves. It's like they're kind of worlds unto themselves. It was really beautiful. Sorry to like call on you now.
No, it's fine. I can't remember exactly what I said, but yeah, for me there's something about like the fact that they're so clear with what they are. Somehow like the proposition of each one is really clear and contained within itself, but then it is, yeah, as you're saying, there's an interconnectedness that's also very clear. But in their kind of separateness, there's this, or like I have this desire, or I notice a certain kind of desire towards each one of how I might either physically interact or just even on an energetic level of like how close do I want to be to one, or actually what is the right distance to be at in order to relate. So something about proximity and distance and intimacy and
yeah, there's the body.
spaciousness.
There's the bodily aspect. I think is really interesting to think about in Yona's work, and I mean, I'm always trying to like overlay this choreographer like you as well. But like, is it because do you think that's how you approach most exhibitions, or is it like, do you go into an exhibition space and you're like, how does my body react to the space, or is that? I think that sorry, I'm just rambling here. I think what I'm trying to say is like, there's something very unique about this space that I think that you kind of hit with Yona's work, which is that there's so much empty space and then these kind of objects that are punctuating. Is that what you mean? That then create this kind of strange to and fro?
Yeah, I mean, there's also something just about the materiality, which we were also talking about yesterday. Like, it feels like there's a domesticity, but there's also like this playground feeling, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it makes me want to like be playful in my thought process towards them too. Like there's primary colours, there's this playground feel, but they're also serious. So it's like, yeah, it's almost like it feels like they're proposing a challenge to me of like how much is my imagination or my physical kind of kinesthetic imagination stimulated with each one. And then if I blink again and take another look, like actually how serious are they as their own objects, and how does the playfulness get removed in relation to the space that's around it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, what do you think, Yona?
I think that's really great. But Lilian, I'm really interested in your take. You know, you talked about how it was quite challenging to make a static object because performance is all about being in the moment, and even you perform the same move, in every performance they change subtly. And because I also come from like performance background, and there's something quite beauty about the iteration, like the subtle improvisation. And so I think my site-specific approach stems from the desire to be responsive to the audience and the space, rather than like same object traveling through different spaces and without acknowledging the change of context.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was quite interesting how you solve that in the forms of like objects and photography. It's not really a question, but
Do you have a response? Not sure. No, that's okay. It's
I mean, I think this is like it's quite ripe, this territory that we're just getting into now about you know, visual arts relationship with dance and movement, and certainly there's been kind of performance practices that have been, you know, highly embraced over 50, 60 years within the visual arts, and dance within, you know, more kind of the last 10 to 15 years. Like, you approaching everything you do as you know, from that perspective of dance, from that perspective of movement, from that perspective of a choreographer. Like, what are your feelings around this kind of, you know, maybe it's short-lived, but this kind of fascination with kind of contemporary dance within, you know, I'm probably meaning less spaces that are, like Gertrude, that are, you know, kind of project spaces and kind of quite experimental by model, but like things like kind of, you know, maybe sort of more kind of like museums kind of co-option of aspects of dance within a lot of their programming. How do you feel about that, and how do you think your kind of collaborators and peers feel about this kind of interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good that dancers have the gallery space as another place to share our work, because the white box is so different to a black box, is so different to a site-specific space. So as a space, it's offering also a different audience, but different parameters in order to view the body. And there's something about the gallery space and the proximity. Like, usually the scale of the watcher to the performer is pretty one-to-one. There's not this distance that creates distance from also the exchange of the movement and the energy in that and the detail. But I think each choreographer, dance practitioner, there's some people here, like, everybody would use it differently and hope for different things from it, because, yeah, it just depends what you're interested in and how you want to draw people's attention to what it is that you're working on. And it might be really aesthetic for some people, and it might be many other things. So I think it's very valuable that we have this space, also to have different conversations with different kinds of audiences and ourselves. And there are some people who work exclusively in the gallery, or that's their main practice, and then there's other people who dip in and out when invited. Yeah, that probably seems obvious, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Should we?
We might, the great thing about Yona's work, from my perspective here, is it's a kind of functional clock staring right at me. So we might open this up if anyone has kind of questions from the audience that they wanted Yona or Lilian to think about. Or let's have a couple of minutes of uncomfortable silence. Okay, well, we might start to transition out of this. So it's been great to hear directly from Yona and Lilian about their projects, and to, you know, in some ways for Lil, this is a swan song for this kind of moment in your professional practice. So Lilian is about to perform a couple of different works at the Biennale of Dance in Venice, a very kind of well respected, well known kind of international platform for contemporary dance, and then thereafter work with a Swedish company for the next year or so. So I guess in some ways that makes this kind of project for you all the more kind of potent, that you can reflect on a lot of your influences from around here. And Yona is soon to returned to a nation where she's done many things, where she was born in South Korea, and she's been commissioned by Sun Jung Kim at Art Sonje to work on a very large-scale kind of architectural project over a 5-week period in I guess it'll open in September, coinciding with Frieze in Seoul. So it's great from my perspective to kind of show these projects here at this particular time, and also want to wish you best for all of the forthcoming projects that you're working on, and just like to ask everyone to warmly thank Yona and Lilian for their generosity and kindness.
Just a little thing, just to say thank you to both of you also for, this is also my first gallery exhibition that is purely object-based, and it's, you've taken some risk in inviting me, so thank you.
Been a pleasure.